Thank you, Larry. That was a very generous introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I'm very excited to have the chance to share some of our latest thinking in this space. As Larry mentioned, I first got introduced to research methods, topics related to multi-level research working with Larry James. And I've had the opportunity to publish a couple of articles in this space. And the presentation that I'm going to give this afternoon is based on an article that I published earlier this year with Amanda Moeller, who's one of my very talented students here at Penn State, and Janelle Whitmer, who was Janelle's center in graduate school when another very talented student I worked with at Wayne State, and we were able to publish an article back when she was a graduate student. So it's been very nice to have an opportunity to work with one of my current students and to collaborate once again with one of my former students. So in terms of kind of the talk today, it's really on this intersection between multi-level research and reproducibility. Multi-level research has really, over the last 40 or 50 years, we've seen this huge uptick in an interest in this space. This particular graph is a Google Ngram that plots the number of books, essentially, that have address a particular topic, in this case, multi-level analysis. So you see over time, these are the books that were published. And I can also look at a search for data aggregation, and those are pretty much perfectly correlated growth curves. And this really shows that a conversation about multi-level analysis can't really be easily taken separately from a conversation of around data aggregation. That these are kind of intertwined in a deep way. And so what we've seen with the kind of theory, measurement, design, analysis in the multi-level space is just huge advancements, really, really important advancements in theory. There's tons of papers, tons of chapters, tons of books and articles that have been written in this space. And all of these contributions have really changed the way that we've thought about multi-level research, right? So early on, just even kind of defining what an emergent process was and what emergence meant and the implications that had for multi-level research and data aggregation was huge. And over time, we've kind of had more refined perspectives on emergence and better understanding of how to integrate kind of the temporal unfolding process of emergent phenomena. From a measurement perspective, we've had a lot of important work done in this space, especially in terms of just understanding what does it mean to have nested data, multi-level data. How do we go about kind of understanding the magnitude of that nested structure or non-independence. I've done some work in the area within group agreement, but so have many others. There's a lot of really good articles out there that talk about different strategies or techniques that you can use to aggregate data using these within group agreement statistics. We have a much better understanding about how to conduct analyses and draw inferences that are accurate, based in part on how we scale our variables, whether we center the variables, whether we group center or grand mean center. From a design perspective, huge improvements in our understanding of data collection, power analysis, dealing with missing data. And analytically, we've moved beyond kind of just the classic multi-level regression to really think about a lot of more complicated designs and ways to handle or analytic tools and ways to handle things like non-normal data, how to handle multi-level structural equations and things. And so when I look at multi-level, we see this kind of gradual but steady increase in interest. If we were to plot the same kind of Google Ngram for reproducibility and replicability, we see it doesn't have that long of a history, right? It's a much shorter history, but boy, it has taken on a very prominent role in the social sciences. And so just a search on reproducibility crisis and replication crisis reveals, several hundred books just in the last few years. And so the talk today is really about the intersection of these two things. It's about wanting to do multi-level research. And for many people doing multi-level research, that would include likely aggregating one or more of their variables. And wanting to conduct that multi-level research and engage in those data aggregation exercises in a way that is transparent, that is clear, that is reproducible, right? I ought to be able to send you my data, you read my paper, and you should be able to come up with the exact same numbers that I have in my paper based upon how I've described things. And so in a classic multi-level model, we might be trying to predict something like an individual's likelihood to engage in helping behavior based upon what kind of mood they're in. But we also think that what type of climate their team has could also contribute to helping behavior, and it might even moderate the relationship of the first, the lower level relationship. And so when it comes to how we would go about measuring climate, we could always go and collect data from key informants. I could just ask the team leaders, is the climate good in your team? Right? There's some advantages of that. There's some disadvantages of that. I could call up the HR department and just say, for these teams, how many grievances were filed over a particular time period, and more objective indicator maybe of issues, problems in the team, but not really directly getting at the perceptions of climate either. With something like a climate construct, typically we don't use those alternative measures. We actually often will just ask people, what is your perception of your work environment, right? And take the team members' perceptions and then aggregate it up to the group level. And in this case, we can think of the construct team climate as something that is an upward emergent phenomenon. It is something that originates in the characteristics of individuals, the team members. It's based upon their thoughts, their interactions, their feelings. And over time, those interactions between team members and the pattern of those interactions and the content of those interactions ultimately give rise to kind of a shared experience within that team. And that shared experience here emerges as a higher level collective phenomenon. Now, not all emergent phenomena require that sense of sharedness, but many do. We can distinguish those kinds of emergent phenomena. There's those that have this sense of sharedness or this consensus within or between the lower level units, in this case, the individuals that comprise the team, versus emergent models where there is no assumption that the team members are consensed in their experiences or their perceptions. And there's different ways to describe these consensus models. They can be called just consensus models. We can talk about convergence. We can talk about kind of constrained ranges of experiences, as opposed to these non-consensus models where we might be looking at the exact opposite of convergence. We might be using a dispersion model where we say that the construct is defined not by the consensus or convergence that we see between the team members, but the opposite. It's defined based upon the dispersion or the differences that exist. And so something like a climate strength variable or a culture strength variable or an attitudinal strength variable would be something that would be consistent with that kind of dispersion framework.